Life is full of unexpected turns. And sometimes, the most challenging moments bring about the greatest changes. This is the story of Sarah, a housekeeper caught in the whirlwind of accusations, betrayal, and the search for truth. As she navigates the complexities of love, family, and forgiveness, Sarah discovers that even in the darkest times, hope can shine through. Follow her journey as she learns the power of second chances and the importance of healing. Subscribe to our channel to start the story today. My name is Sarah, and I work as a housekeeper at the Martin Mansion in the heart of the city. Life here, inside these grand walls, always felt like walking a tightrope. One misstep, one moment of weakness, and everything I'd worked for could come crashing down. My life had never been easy. I'd spent years struggling to take care of my mother, Elizabeth, who had fallen seriously ill a few years ago. Her condition worsened with each passing day, and every penny I earned was devoted to her medical bills and keeping a roof over our heads. For all my efforts, it never felt like enough. I was just another face in the background, working long hours for the Martin family, doing the dirty work, cleaning, scrubbing floors, and making sure everything was pristine. No one noticed the housekeepers unless they were needed to fetch something or clean up a mess. The Martin Mansion itself was a masterpiece, gleaming glass and sharp edges, with sprawling gardens that stretched far beyond what the eye could see. From the outside, it looked like the kind of home that belonged in a dream, a fairy tale, but to me, it was simply a reminder of how different my world was from theirs. Meredith Martin was the matriarch of the household, and she made sure everyone knew exactly who had the power. She had an air about her, one that demanded attention without saying a word. I often caught myself glancing at her as she swept through the house in her expensive heels. Her posture perfect, her every movement deliberate. When she passed by, she wouldn't spare a glance in my direction. I wasn't worth her time, just another servant in the long line of people she paid to do her bidding. It wasn't Meredith who caught my attention most often, though. It was Ethan Martin, her husband. He was distant, yes, but there was something about him that intrigued me. He never treated me with cruelty like his wife did, but neither did he show me any kindness. He was indifferent, yet there was a flicker of something in his eyes whenever they met mine, an unspoken understanding. Perhaps it was as if he was trying to place me, to remember something long forgotten. But he never said a word to me beyond the occasional curt nod. And I never dared to speak to him, not wanting to draw attention to myself. I couldn't afford it, not when I was already walking such a fragile line. Most days, I worked with my head down, my thoughts consumed by my mother's illness. The bills kept piling up. The medical treatments were draining what little money we had. And my only source of income was here at the mansion. If I lost this job, I'd lose everything. The weight of that thought kept me going, even on the days when my body felt like it was giving up. Then one morning, something shifted in the air. The usual quiet hum of the house was replaced by a tension that hung thick in the hallways. The staff moved about their duties, their eyes downcast, avoiding each other's gaze. I could feel it too, the unease that had settled over the mansion like a storm cloud. I didn't know what had happened, but I could sense something was wrong. It didn't take long before I overheard the whispers in the kitchen. A diamond necklace, Meredith's prized possession, had gone missing. The staff was on edge, their conversations hushed as they speculated about what had happened. Meredith had been furious. It wasn't just any necklace, it was a piece of jewelry Ethan had given her for their anniversary. If she had lost it, I knew it would cause more than just a scene, it would bring disaster. I'd seen that necklace before, of course. It sparkled around Meredith's neck at every high society event and whenever she entertained her business partners. It was the kind of piece that made people stop and stare. But to me, it was more than just a beautiful object, it was a symbol of the divide between our worlds. While I scrubbed floors and polished furniture, Meredith flaunted her wealth and power, never once acknowledging the lives of those who worked for her. The day passed slowly, the tension only growing as the hours wore on. By the time I finished cleaning the upstairs rooms and made my way downstairs, I could hear Meredith's voice, sharp and angry, echoing through the halls. I knew better than to get too close when she was upset. So I kept my distance, focusing on my work. But then, she stormed into the room where I was cleaning, her eyes locking onto mine. "Where were you this morning?" she demanded, her voice cold and accusatory. I froze, my cleaning rag still in hand. My heart pounded in my chest. And for a moment, I couldn't find the words to answer. I was downstairs. I stammered. "I didn't touch anything, Mrs. Martin. I swear." She stepped closer, her gaze narrowing with suspicion. "We'll see about that," she hissed, her voice laced with venom before she turned and marched out of the room. I was left standing there, my hands trembling, the fear settling in my gut. Something told me this wasn't going to end well. I tried to focus on my work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That Meredith's suspicions were hanging over me like a storm cloud ready to break. As the day wore on, the entire mansion seemed to hold its breath. The staff moved about quietly, eyes averted, pretending to be busy but clearly aware of the storm that was brewing. I kept my head down, doing my best to stay out of the way. But deep down, I knew that it wouldn't be long before I'd be dragged into this mess. Whether I wanted to be or not. The tension in the mansion grew heavier with each passing hour. I could feel it, like a weight pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe. The staff was on edge, their movements slow, deliberate, as if they were walking through a minefield, afraid that any wrong step would set off an explosion. The whispers were everywhere. No one spoke directly to me, but the glances, the nervous glances, said everything I needed to know. The diamond necklace was still missing, and the blame was slowly shifting toward me. I kept my distance, my hands shaking as I cleaned the downstairs rooms, trying to make myself invisible. I had never been good at standing out, and now, I wished even more that I could fade into the background, unnoticed. But no matter how hard I tried to avoid attention, I couldn't escape the storm that was brewing. That afternoon, as I was folding linens in the laundry room, the door swung open with a force that made me jump. Meredith stormed in, her face twisted with fury. And right behind her was Ethan, his expression troubled but silent. He didn't say a word as he entered, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. The other staff members lingered just outside the door, their eyes filled with concern but saying nothing. "Sarah," Meredith's voice rang out, sharp and accusing. "This woman," she jabbed a finger in my direction, "has stolen from me. The necklace, the one Ethan gave me for our anniversary, it's gone. And she's the thief." The words hit me like a physical blow. My heart dropped into my stomach. And for a moment, I couldn't move. The room seemed to close in around me, and my legs felt weak. I wanted to deny it, to shout that I hadn't taken anything, that I was innocent, but the words caught in my throat. I stood there, frozen, unable to process what was happening. I started to protest. But Meredith cut me off. "Don't lie to me, Sarah," she spat, her voice venomous. "You're the only one who had access to my dressing room this morning. You've always been ungrateful for the chance to work here. And now you've shown your true colors. You're nothing but a thief." I could feel the tears rising in my throat, but I fought them back. I hadn't been anywhere near Meredith's dressing room that morning. I had spent the entire morning downstairs, cleaning the rooms on the lower floors. I hadn't even set foot on the upper floors until much later. But none of that seemed to matter now. Meredith had made up her mind, and no amount of reasoning would change it. Ethan's voice was soft but firm as he spoke up, his gaze shifting between Meredith and me. "Maybe we should." "No," Meredith snapped, turning to him with an icy glare. "She needs to be fired. I won't have a thief in my house." I could feel the floor drop out from under me. Fired. The word echoed in my mind, each syllable like a death sentence. If I lost this job, I'd lose everything. My mother's care, our home, the fragile stability we had fought so hard to maintain, it would all be gone. "Mr. Martin," I said, my voice trembling, "please, you have to believe me. I didn't do this. I would never steal from anyone." Ethan met my gaze for a moment, his eyes searching mine, and for the briefest second, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt, of sympathy. But it vanished just as quickly, and he looked away, rubbing his temple, as if trying to erase the entire situation. "I think," Ethan hesitated, glancing between his wife and me, his expression conflicted. I think it's best if we handle this quietly. Let's not make it a spectacle. But Meredith wasn't having it. No, she sneered. This is my house. And I will not be humiliated by a lowly maid who thinks she can steal from me. She needs to go. Now. I felt my chest tighten. My heart racing. This was it. The end of everything I had worked for. Everything I had sacrificed. I turned to Ethan. Desperation in my eyes. Please. Mr. Martin. Don't do this. I swear. I didn't steal anything. I would never do something like this. Please. But Ethan's gaze softened for just a moment before he looked away. His voice barely above a whisper. It's for the best. Sarah. Go. The words cut through me like a knife. Fired. Evicted. Cast aside. I stood there, unable to comprehend what had just happened. My world was falling apart. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. The world felt like it was spinning. And I couldn't find a way to steady myself. My hands shook as I gathered my few belongings in the laundry room. Each item feeling heavier than the last. My mind raced with thoughts of my mother. Of the future. Of how I would explain this to her. Losing this job meant losing everything. Her treatment. Our apartment. The life we had built out of sheer determination. But now it was all slipping through my fingers. Just like the necklace that Meredith had accused me of stealing. I had to leave the mansion. But I couldn't bear the thought of walking out those grand doors. I had worked for the Martins for years. And in all that time, I had never once crossed the line. And yet, now, I was being thrown out like a criminal. With no chance to explain myself. As I made my way upstairs to gather my things, I heard the muffled sound of Meredith's voice echoing through the hallways. Sharp and demanding. I wasn't surprised. She was likely still fuming. And I knew she would spare no effort to ensure I was completely discredited. When I reached my small room at the end of the hall, I opened the door slowly, my heart heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. I closed the door behind me and dropped my bag onto the bed. My body feeling drained, like the life had been sucked out of me. I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of it all. How had it come to this? I heard a soft knock at the door, followed by Ethan's voice. Sarah? He called, tentative, as if unsure of whether he had the right to speak to me. When I didn't answer right away, the door opened slowly. I looked up to find him standing in the doorway. His expression conflicted, a mix of guilt and hesitation in his eyes. He didn't step inside but leaned against the doorframe, as though he didn't want to intrude on my space, but couldn't stay away either. I'm sorry, he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. This isn't right. I don't believe you did it. But Meredith, she's just... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I didn't steal it, Ethan, I said, my voice low but firm. You have to know that. I do know, he replied, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. And I saw something, doubt, perhaps, or sympathy, flicker in them. But Meredith's made up her mind. And I'm sorry, Sarah, but I can't go against her. You have to understand. I wanted to scream at him. To tell him that I had always believed he was different. That he had been more than just another rich, indifferent man. But the words died in my throat. And all I could do was nod silently. He wasn't going to help me. He wasn't going to stand by me. This wasn't about what was right anymore. It was about power. About Meredith's control over him. And over the house. Ethan seemed to sense my frustration. Look, he said, his voice low. I'm not going to tell anyone what happened. But you need to leave. Now. I'll make sure it's quiet. And you can go without making a scene. Just, please, don't make it harder than it has to be. The words stung, but I held back the tears. I had no choice but to listen. I gathered my things, one item at a time. Each step feeling like it took me further from everything I had ever known. I walked out of that room. Out of the mansion that had been my home for so long. And I didn't look back. But as I made my way to the front door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play. I couldn't shake the gnawing suspicion that Meredith wasn't just after the necklace. She wasn't just angry about losing her precious piece of jewelry. No, there was something more to her fury. I had become a threat in her eyes. And she would stop at nothing to destroy me. As the heavy front door closed behind me, I didn't know what to think. What to feel. I was out in the cold, both figuratively and literally, standing alone in the empty street. And as the mansion loomed behind me, I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever truly escape its shadow. The cold air outside the mansion seemed to mock me as I stood there, clutching my small bag, feeling as though my entire world had been torn apart. Every step I took away from the Martin mansion felt like a further distance from everything I had known. Everything I had worked so hard to build. But there was no turning back now. I had been fired, accused of something I didn't do, and left with nothing but my own broken hopes. I didn't go straight home. I couldn't face my mother just yet. She was already dealing with so much, her health, the endless medical bills, the uncertainty of our future. I didn't want to burden her with the weight of what had just happened. So I walked aimlessly, my thoughts swirling, unsure of where to go or what to do. I needed to think. I needed to understand how I had come to this point. How I had gone from being just a housekeeper at the mansion to an accused criminal with nothing left. As I walked, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting to see a message from my mother. But instead, it was a text from Ethan. "I'm sorry, Sarah," the message read. "I never wanted it to end like this. I hope you understand why I couldn't help you. But I'm willing to do what I can to make things right. You and your mother don't deserve this." I stood still for a moment, staring at the words on the screen, trying to make sense of them. I couldn't decide whether to be angry at him for not standing up to Meredith, for not fighting for me, or to feel a strange sense of gratitude that he was at least trying to make amends. But no amount of apologies could undo what had been done. The damage had already been done. After a few moments, I made my way back home. As I entered our small apartment, I was met with the familiar smell of medicine and old furniture. My mother was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her face tired but warm as always. "How was work?" she asked gently, her voice soft but filled with concern. She didn't notice the tension in my face, the way my hands shook as I tried to hide my emotions. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. "It wasn't a good day, Mom," I said quietly. I didn't know how to tell her the truth. How to explain that I had been accused of stealing, that I had been fired, and that our lives were now hanging by a thread. But as I looked at her, my heart broke. She deserved so much more than this. She had always been so strong, so selfless, putting everything she had into raising me, into making sure I had a better life than she had. But now, I was the one who had failed her. I was the one who had failed us both. Before I could speak, there was a soft knock at the door. I froze, my heart racing, unsure of who it could be. I walked slowly to the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. When I opened it, I was surprised to see Ethan standing there, his face tired, his posture stiff. He looked as though he hadn't slept in days, the weight of what had happened hanging heavily on him. "I didn't know where else to go," he said softly, looking past me into the apartment. "I need to talk to you." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't expected him to come here, to seek me out after everything that had happened. But part of me was curious. Part of me still wanted to know why he hadn't stood up for me when it mattered most. Part of me wondered if, deep down, he was really sorry for what he had allowed to happen. I stepped aside to let him in, my heart pounding in my chest. As he entered, his eyes met mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in them. Regret, perhaps. But then he spoke again, his voice low and hesitant. "I know it's too late to fix what's happened, but I want to make things right," he said, his eyes searching mine. "I've been thinking about it a lot, and I realize I didn't do enough to help you. You didn't deserve this." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to believe that he truly meant what he said. But another part of me was wary, unsure if I could trust him after everything that had unfolded. Ethan took a deep breath and continued. "I've spoken to some people, and I've arranged for your mother's medical bills to be paid. I know it's not enough, but it's a start. I want to help. I want to do the right thing." I stared at him, shocked by his words. He had done what? He had paid my mother's bills? I could hardly believe it. After everything, he was offering to help? But I couldn't let myself believe it was that simple. Not after everything he had allowed to happen. Not after the way he had turned his back on me when I needed him most. I don't know what to say. I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Why now? Why after everything? Ethan's expression softened, and for the first time, I saw a vulnerability in his eyes. Because I've realized that family is more important than anything else. And I don't want to lose you. Not now. Not ever. The weight of his words hit me hard. And for a moment, I couldn't speak. Could I trust him again? Could I forgive him for everything that had happened? The answers weren't clear, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something new. Something uncertain, but perhaps, just perhaps, something better. The next few days felt like walking through a fog. The events of the past week replayed in my mind like an unending loop. The mansion, the accusations, the words Ethan had spoken, they all weighed heavily on me, making it hard to breathe, to think, to find peace. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see Meredith's face twisted with rage, hear her accusations, feel the sting of betrayal from Ethan. And yet, there was something inside me that wouldn't let go. Something that urged me to find a way through the pain. To figure out what this all meant. Ethan had done something unexpected. He had paid off my mother's medical bills. At first, I couldn't believe it. The gesture was so out of character. So unlike the man I thought I knew. Was it enough to erase the past? No. But it was a start. A start toward something. Perhaps. Maybe this wasn't the end. After all. It was evening when the knock came at the door again. I hadn't expected anyone, especially not Ethan, but there he was. His face was drawn, his expression weary, but there was something else there too. Something that made me hesitate before opening the door. I need to talk to you, he said softly, standing just outside the threshold, unsure of how to proceed. I know you probably don't want to hear it, but I can't leave without saying what's on my mind. I stood there for a moment, caught between anger and confusion. Part of me still wanted to shut the door, to tell him to leave, to never come back, but another part of me, the part that still remembered the man I thought I knew, the part that wanted to believe in the good of people, couldn't close that door just yet. I stepped aside, allowing him in. As soon as he entered, I felt the weight of his presence in the room. He looked around, his eyes briefly settling on my mother, who had been quietly sitting in the corner. She gave him a small, neutral smile, though I could see the wariness in her gaze. She had always been protective of me. And rightfully so. I've been thinking a lot about everything. Ethan began, his voice quiet but firm. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I owe you both an explanation. And I owe you, Sarah, more than I've given you. I've realized that I didn't do enough to protect you. To stand by you. I was too afraid of what Meredith would think. Of losing everything I had. But I've lost something far more important in the process. The trust of the one person who deserved it the most. I couldn't bring myself to speak. The words I had rehearsed in my mind, the questions I had wanted to ask, felt heavy in my throat. How could I trust him? How could I believe that this was real? That he wasn't just doing this out of guilt or obligation? I don't know if I can ever make up for what I did. He continued, his eyes searching mine. But I want to try. I want to be there for you. For both of you. I'm not asking for anything in return. I want to make things right. My heart wavered, and I found myself unsure of what to do. There had been so much hurt. So many moments of silence, of unspoken words that had lingered between us. How could we just pick up where we left off? Could I truly let go of the past and allow him back into my life? My mother, who had been listening intently, spoke up. Her voice was calm, measured, but there was a softness there that I hadn't heard in a long time. I think it's time we both stopped running from the past, she said quietly. We've all made mistakes, Ethan. We've all suffered, but I believe there's room for healing. For all of us. Her words hung in the air like a lifeline. A bridge between the past and whatever future we might build. Ethan looked at her, his eyes softening with gratitude, and then turned back to me. I can't change what happened, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I want to change what happens from here. I want to be part of your life, Sarah, and I want to help your mother. However I can. There was a long silence. And I could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on me. I didn't know if I could forgive him. Not yet. But I knew one thing. I couldn't keep holding on to the anger, the resentment, the fear that had kept me bound in that mansion, in that world of lies. I needed to let go. Slowly, I nodded. I don't know what this will look like. I don't know if I'm ready to trust you, Ethan, but I'm willing to try. For the sake of my mother. And for the sake of what's left of us. A small, tentative smile appeared on his face. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw the man I had once believed in. A man who wanted to make things right. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. My mother reached out and squeezed my hand. Her grip firm and reassuring. One step at a time, she whispered. And with that, we took our first step toward healing. Toward rebuilding. Toward the possibility of a future where the past didn't define us anymore. As the days went by, things slowly began to change. The mansion, once a place of tension and fear, now felt different. It wasn't perfect, and I knew there were still many challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. Ethan kept his word. He came by regularly, trying to rebuild the fragile trust between us. He made it clear that he wanted to be part of my life. And though I wasn't sure yet if I could let go of the past, I saw a man who was genuinely trying to make amends. My mother's health improved, not just because of the medical bills being paid, but because of the weight that had been lifted from our shoulders. The future didn't feel so impossible anymore. We weren't just surviving, we were starting to live again. One step at a time. But the most profound change wasn't in the material things. It was in the way we began to heal emotionally. The scars from the past still lingered. But we were no longer defined by them. We were a family, not just by blood, but by the shared understanding that we had the power to shape our future together. For the first time in my life, I began to think about my own dreams. I wasn't just Sarah, the housekeeper. I was Sarah, a woman with a past. With hopes. With a future. And that future, uncertain as it was mine to define. So, as I stand here, looking back at how far we've come, I realize that sometimes, the most painful chapters of our lives lead us to the most beautiful new beginnings. And for that, I am grateful. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to follow more life stories.